The wedding revelation. The sun shone brightly over the sprawling vineyard estate where Sophia and Daniel's wedding was set to take place. The air buzzed with the lively chatter of friends and family, the clink of glasses, and the lilting strains of a string quartet. Sophia adjusted the lace veil cascading from her honey-colored curls, her reflection a glowing bride in the antique mirror of the bridal suite. Outside, Daniel nervously paced the terrace, smoothing his cufflinks, stealing glances toward the horizon where guests began to gather. It was the perfect day, until it wasn't. The ceremony itself unfolded flawlessly, an aisle adorned with petals, vows that had their guests in tears, and a kiss that sealed their promises. The reception, however, was where fate began to show its hand. It started with the toast. Sophia's mother, Clara, stood, raising her glass of champagne. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied herself with a smile that only those closest to her would recognize as forced. "I've waited for this day since my little girl first told me about Daniel. Sophia, my sunshine, and Daniel, the man. We are so proud to welcome into our family." Her voice cracked, and she hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Daniel's parents seated at the opposite table. Sophia noticed the tension immediately. Clara's fingers gripped the glass a little too tightly, her lips forming words she seemed to reconsider before speaking them. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Clara continued, her voice now carrying an edge that wasn't there before. "How fate has a way of bringing people together, or sometimes revealing what was always hidden." The crowd murmured as the jovial atmosphere turned uncertain. Daniel's father, Richard, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, exchanging a glance with his wife, Margaret, who suddenly looked pale. Clara placed her glass down, her hand trembling slightly. "I wasn't sure I should say this today," she confessed, looking directly at Daniel. "But it's time for the truth to come out. Richard," her gaze darted toward his, "you owe this boy an explanation." The room froze. Richard's face blanched. Margaret gasped audibly, clutching his arm. Sophia's eyes darted between her mother and her new father-in-law, her chest tightening. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Clara took a deep breath, the weight of years of secrets spilling out in her next words. "Richard is your father, Daniel." The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. But to Sophia and Daniel, the rest of the world seemed to fade into silence. Sophia's hands gripped the edge of the table for balance as her knees weakened. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not possible." Daniel's jaw clenched, his fists trembling at his sides. "This is some kind of joke," he said, glaring at Clara, then his own parents, searching their faces. For denial, for reassurance, anything to prove this wasn't true. But Richard's ashen expression and Margaret's tearful gaze confirmed the worst. I didn't know until recently," Clara confessed, tears brimming in her eyes. "Richard and it was one night, years before I met your father, Sophia. I didn't know he was your father, Daniel, not until I saw him again when you brought him to meet us. And by then, what was I supposed to do? Tear you apart? But I can't keep it in any longer." Sophia staggered back, her mind racing, pieces of her life now rearranging into something unrecognizable. Her eyes found Daniel's, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. "We're siblings?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Daniel shook his head violently, stepping back as if physical distance could undo the revelation. No, we can't be. This can't be real." His voice was sharp, desperate, as though willing the truth to bend to his will. "I don't know if it's true," Clara admitted, her voice shaking. "We never tested, but the timing, it's possible." Possible. That one word detonated like a bomb in the middle of their perfect day, their perfect life. Every shared moment, every kiss, every whispered promise now carried a shadow too heavy to bear. The vineyard, once a backdrop of romance, became a battleground of emotion. Guests whispered and stared, some excusing themselves, unsure of how to react. Richard tried to approach Daniel, but his son recoiled, his expression one of betrayal. Sophia, tears streaming down her cheeks, stepped forward, reaching for Daniel. "We'll figure this out," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "We'll take a test. This doesn't change how I feel about you." Daniel looked at her, his eyes raw with anguish. "How can you say that? If it's true—" His voice broke. "If it's true, everything we've built is wrong." Sophia shook her head, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. "It's not wrong. We didn't know. None of this is our fault." But Daniel pulled away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of everything he'd just learned. The results were in. The envelope had sat unopened on the table between them for hours, each of them too paralyzed by fear to break the seal. Finally, it was Daniel who summoned the courage. He slid his finger under the flap, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear Sophia's uneven breaths beside him. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper and read the words that would decide their future. "Not a match," Daniel whispered, the tension in his voice giving way to a tremor of disbelief. He reread it twice, then a third time, just to be sure. He passed the paper to Sophia, his eyes searching hers for any trace of relief. Sophia scanned the document, her breath catching in her throat as she processed the words. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, but she couldn't tell if they were tears of joy, exhaustion, or something else entirely. "We're not related," she whispered, the words trembling as they left her lips. "It's not true." For a moment, the weight of the revelation lifted, and the room felt lighter. They weren't bound by the horror of an impossible truth, but the damage, the emotional shrapnel of the ordeal, was still there, lodged deep in their hearts. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, hollowed out. "So that's it then," he said, his voice low. "We're not siblings. But where does that leave us?" Sophia reached across the table, desperate to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. "It leaves us where we were before all of this," she said, her voice laced with quiet determination. "We can go back to how it was." But Daniel shook his head, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Can we? After everything that's been said? After everything we've felt? Sophia, I don't even know who I am anymore. My father—" He broke off, his voice cracking. "The man I've looked up to my whole life lied to me. And your mom. She kept this secret for years. How am I supposed to trust anyone again?" Sophia's hand hovered over his, but stopped short, unsure if her touch would comfort him or push him further away. "We didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "We were lied to, yes, but we're still us, Daniel. You and me. What we have is real. That hasn't changed." Daniel looked up at her, his eyes filled with anguish. "I want to believe that," he admitted. "But I can't just flip a switch and pretend like everything's okay. Every time I look at you, I remember standing at that reception, hearing those words, feeling like my whole world was falling apart." Sophia's heart broke as she saw the pain etched across his face. She had hoped the test results would be their salvation, the thing that set everything right again. But now she realized that the truth wasn't enough on its own. Healing would take time and patience. "I'm not asking you to forget," she said softly. "I'm asking you to try. We've been through so much together, Daniel. Please don't let this be the thing that tears us apart." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I don't know how to move forward," he admitted. "But I don't want to lose you." Sophia felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. "We'll figure it out," she said. Together. The rebuilding. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, piece by piece, they began to rebuild what had been shattered. Daniel started therapy to process his feelings about his father's betrayal, while Sophia worked to repair her relationship with her mother. They both agreed to step back from wedding plans or even discussions about their future as a couple until they were both ready. For now, it was about finding their footing as individuals before they could truly stand together again. There were setbacks, of course. Arguments that flared up out of nowhere, triggered by a stray comment or a lingering doubt. Moments of distance, where Daniel would retreat into himself, and Sophia would wonder if he was slipping away for good. But there were also moments of connection, late-night talks where they shared their fears and hopes, quiet walks where words weren't needed, and small gestures that reminded them of the love that had brought them together in the first place. Eventually, Daniel sat down with his father, demanding answers. The conversation was raw and painful, but it brought a clarity he hadn't expected. "I made a mistake," Richard admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But it was never about you. I love you, son. That's the only truth you need to know." Sophia, too, found a sense of closure with her mother. Though she couldn't fully forgive Clara for the years of secrecy, she came to understand the fear and shame that had kept her silent. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a starting point. Months later, on a quiet evening under the stars, Daniel and Sophia sat on the porch of their small home, sipping wine and watching the fireflies dance in the distance. Over the next year, Daniel and Sophia took things one step at a time. The perfect love story they had once envisioned was replaced by something more real, flawed, imperfect, but undeniably resilient. They learned how to navigate the shadows, cast by the revelation, leaning on each other when the weight became too much to bear alone. Healing together, it wasn't always easy. Some days, the memories of their wedding and the chaos that followed would resurface like a haunting melody. Sophia would catch herself staring at their wedding photos, remembering the look of anguish on Daniel's face as the truth unraveled before them. Daniel, too, had moments where trust felt like a fragile thread, easily frayed by his father's betrayal and the secrets that had reshaped his understanding of family. But the thing they held on to, the thing that carried them through, was the love that had drawn them together in the first place. Slowly, they began to redefine what their relationship meant, not as an escape from their families, but as a foundation they were building on their own terms. Sophia suggested they revisit the vineyard where it all happened, a way to reclaim the space that had been marred by pain. Daniel hesitated at first, but eventually he agreed. Standing together beneath the same oak tree where they had exchanged vows, they took a moment to reflect. "This place isn't about what happened anymore," Sophia said, her fingers entwined with his. "It's about what we'll make of it." Daniel nodded, pulling her close. "And what we'll make of us." It was a small step, but an important one. A second chance. Months turned into seasons, and by the following summer, Daniel and Sophia had grown into a new version of themselves, a version that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Daniel had repaired much of his relationship with his father, though it was far from perfect. There were still conversations to be had, wounds to mend, but there was also progress. Richard had started making amends, showing up not just with apologies, but with action, proving his commitment to earning back his son's trust. Sophia, too, found a new kind of balance with her mother. Clara had become more open, more vulnerable, sharing pieces of her own story that Sophia had never known. It wasn't easy to forgive, but over time, the walls between them began to crumble, leaving room for something softer, more honest. One evening, as the golden light of sunset bathed their home, Daniel surprised Sophia with a small box. Her heart raced as she opened it, expecting another ring. but instead she found a simple silver key. "It's to the little cottage by the lake," Daniel explained, his eyes steady on hers. "I know we said we'd hold off on big decisions, but I realized I don't need anything fancy or complicated. I just need us. Somewhere quiet, somewhere new, where we can start fresh." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she smiled, her heart swelling with love for the man who had grown so much over the past year. "It's perfect," she whispered. The lake cottage became their sanctuary. They spent weekends fixing it up together, painting walls, planting a garden, and filling the space with pieces of their story. It wasn't a grand mansion or a sprawling estate, but it was theirs. And in that little house by the water, they found a kind of peace that had eluded them for so long. The renewal a year after their wedding day, Daniel and Sophia stood on the shores of the lake, surrounded by only their closest friends and family. This time, there was no grand ceremony, no elaborate plans. Just the sound of the water lapping against the shore, the warmth of the setting sun, and the quiet murmur of love shared between two people who had fought for it. Sophia wore a simple, white dress, her hair loose and flowing in the breeze. Daniel stood beside her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. They exchanged new vows, ones that reflected not just the love they had for each other, but the trials they had endured and the strength they had found. "I promise to love you not just when it's easy," Daniel said, his voice steady and sure, "but when it's hard. I promise to face the storms with you, to carry the weight when it feels too heavy, and to never stop fighting for us." Sophia blinked back tears, her heart full. "And I promise to stand beside you, even when it's scary, to trust in the love we've built and to choose you every day, no matter what comes." As they exchanged rings once more, the crowd erupted into cheers. Clara and Richard, standing at opposite ends of the gathering, exchanged brief but cordial smiles, a tentative truce forged in the love of their children. Margaret, Daniel's mother, wiped away tears, her heart full of hope that healing might extend even further. When Daniel kissed Sophia, the world around them faded, leaving only the quiet certainty that they had made it through the fire and found something unshakable on the other side. The legacy of their love as the years unfolded. Daniel and Sophia's life became a tapestry woven with quiet joys, hard-won triumphs, and an unwavering bond that defied the scars of their past. The cottage by the lake transformed from a place of retreat to a home alive with laughter, love, and the pitter-patter of tiny feet. Their daughter, Emma, was the light of their lives, a little whirlwind of curiosity and mischief who loved nothing more than chasing butterflies and watching the sunrise over the water with her parents. She grew up surrounded by a kind of love that was deeply rooted, one that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. Sophia and Daniel made it a point to show Emma the importance of honesty, resilience, and forgiveness, lessons born of their own journey. A family's reconciliation. The relationships with their parents also evolved over time. Clara became a devoted grandmother, her love for Emma a bridge to a deeper connection with Sophia. They still had their moments of tension, but the wounds of the past were gradually replaced with understanding. Sophia learned to see her mother not just as the keeper of painful secrets, but as a woman who had made mistakes in the name of fear and love. For Daniel, his relationship with Richard was a longer road, marked by moments of awkwardness and tentative efforts at reconciliation. Richard worked tirelessly to prove his commitment to his son, not through grand gestures, but through the consistency of being present. From showing up to fix a broken fence at the lake house to quietly offering advice when Daniel needed it most, he began to rebuild the trust he had broken. One summer evening, as the family gathered around a bonfire by the lake, Daniel turned to his father with an unguarded look. "I've forgiven you," he said, his voice steady. "I don't forget, but I've let it go." For me. For Emma. Richard's eyes brimmed with tears as he nodded, his gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. It wasn't the kind of relationship they had before, but it was a new beginning. And for Daniel, that was enough. The anniversary, on their 10th anniversary, Daniel and Sophia decided to renew their vows once more, this time surrounded not only by their friends and family, but also by the life they had built together. Emma, now 8 years old, insisted on being the one to walk her mother down the aisle, her tiny hands gripping Sophia's as they made their way toward Daniel, who stood waiting by the water's edge. The ceremony was simple, a reflection of everything they had come to cherish about their journey. As Sophia stood before Daniel, she couldn't help but marvel at the man he had become, the boy she fell in love with, the man who had grown beside her, and the father who made her heart swell with pride. "I didn't know what love really was when I met you," Sophia said in her vows, her voice carrying across the quiet lake. "I thought it was something easy, something that came without pain. But you've taught me that love is in the hard things. It's in the work, the forgiveness, and the promise to keep choosing each other every single day. You are my home. Daniel." Daniel took her hands, his gaze unwavering. "Sophia, you are my anchor. You've been my light in the darkest times, my partner in every sense of the word. I've learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. You are my forever." As they kissed, Emma squealed with delight, clapping her hands and running to hug her parents. Their friends and family cheered, and for the first time, Sophia and Daniel felt a sense of completeness, not just in their love, but in the unity of everyone who had walked this road with them. A new chapter. In the years that followed, Daniel and Sophia's story continued to grow. They opened a small business together, a cozy cafe near the lake that became a hub for the community. Emma grew up running through the cafe's kitchen, eventually helping her parents with everything from baking to greeting customers. It became more than a business. It was a symbol of the life they had built, one filled with warmth and connection. As they aged, Sophia and Daniel often found themselves sitting on the porch of their lake house, watching the water and reflecting on their journey. They had faced the unthinkable, endured heartbreak, and rebuilt from the ashes. And in doing so, they had created a love story not defined by its perfection, but by its resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in hues of gold and orange, Daniel took Sophia's hand. His hair was streaked with silver now, and fine lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes. But the way he looked at her hadn't changed. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked softly. Sophia smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The wedding?" He nodded. "The moment everything fell apart." Sophia let out a quiet laugh, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his arm. "I used to." A legacy of love. As the years rolled on, Daniel and Sophia's love story evolved into something greater than just the two of them. It became a legacy. Their daughter, Emma, blossomed into a confident, compassionate young woman, carrying with her the lessons of resilience and forgiveness that her parents had modeled. By the time Emma was in her 20s, she had grown close to both sets of grandparents, despite the fractures that had once divided the family. She often spent hours listening to their stories of hardships, mistakes, and the courage it took to rebuild. She came to understand that family was not about perfection, but about the effort to stay connected through the challenges. One autumn evening, as Emma prepared to leave for her final year of university, she sat with her parents on the porch of their lake house. The air was crisp, the leaves a kaleidoscope of reds and golds. She turned to them, her face thoughtful. "You know," Emma began, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "I used to wonder why you never hid what happened at your wedding from me. Why you told me the truth instead of just brushing it under the rug like most people would have." Daniel and Sophia exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Sophia smiled gently. "Because the truth is what makes us who we are, Emma. We didn't want you to think love was some perfect fairy tale. We wanted you to see that it's the messy, painful, beautiful work we put into it that makes it real." Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "And we wanted you to know that even when things fall apart, you can always put them back together if you're willing to fight for it." Emma looked between them, her eyes glistening. "You've given me more than love. You've given me strength," she said softly. "And I hope, one day, I find something as real as what you two have." Sophia reached over, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You will. And when you do, you'll know it's worth every challenge, every tear, and every triumph." The next generation. Years later, Emma stood in the very same spot where her parents had exchanged their second set of vows, preparing to marry the love of her life. Daniel and Sophia watched from the front row, their hands intertwined, their faces glowing with pride. The ceremony was simple, intimate, just as Daniel and Sophia's had been all those years ago. When Emma read her vows, she spoke of her parents, her voice steady and full of gratitude. "My parents taught me that love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about owning them, learning from them, and building something stronger because of them," Emma said, her gaze briefly meeting theirs. "They showed me that love is a choice we make every day, and I choose you, today and always." Tears shimmered in Sophia's eyes as she leaned into Daniel, her heart full. A lifetime of love. As the years turned into decades, Daniel and Sophia continued to find joy in the life they had built. They became grandparents, doting on Emma's children and passing down the lessons they had learned to a new generation. The lake house remained their sanctuary, a place where their family gathered for summers of laughter, winters by the fire, and quiet moments of reflection. The walls were adorned with photographs, snapshots of their journey from a young couple in love to the heart of a family that had weathered storms together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun, set over the water, Sophia rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived, but her eyes still sparkled with the same warmth that had captivated him all those years ago. "You know," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "We've had a good run, haven't we?" Daniel chuckled, his hand covering hers. "Better than good. We built something beautiful, Sophia." She turned to him, her gaze steady. "We built a legacy, one that will last long after we're gone." Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "And it all started with us." As the stars began to fill the night sky, they sat together in the embrace of a love that had spanned a lifetime. A love that had not only endured, but thrived, leaving an indelible mark on the world and the hearts of everyone they touched. For Daniel and Sophia, theirs was a love story that proved the greatest challenges often lead to the most beautiful endings. A peaceful farewell in the twilight of their lives, Daniel and Sophia found themselves spending more and more time at the lake house. It had become the beating heart of their family, a sanctuary where Emma, her husband, and their children would often visit, filling the house with laughter and love. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast the lake in hues of orange and pink, Daniel and Sophia sat on the porch swing, their hands intertwined as always. The air was still, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Sophia leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, her voice soft. "I've been thinking a lot about the beginning lately, about how young we were, how scared we were after everything that happened." Daniel smiled, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "And look where we are now. We didn't just survive, Sophia. We thrived. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my anchor through it all. And you've been my light, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion, every step of the way. That night, as they lay side by side in the bed they had shared for decades, Sophia drifted off to sleep with her hand resting over Daniel's heart, feeling its steady rhythm. When morning came, the sun rose gently over the lake, casting its golden light over the still water. Emma arrived later that day to visit, only to find her parents still in bed, their hands clasped together as if they had never let go. They had passed away peacefully in their sleep, together as they had always been, the celebration of their lives. The funeral was held at the lake house per Daniel and Sophia's wishes. It wasn't a somber affair, but a celebration of a love that had inspired everyone who knew them. Family and friends gathered beneath the oak tree where they had exchanged their vows, sharing stories and memories that painted a vivid picture of their extraordinary journey. Emma, now a mother herself, stood before the crowd with her children, by her side. Her voice trembled, but was filled with conviction as she spoke. My parents taught me that love isn't about avoiding pain or pretending everything is perfect. It's about facing the hard truths, forgiving when it seems impossible, and choosing each other every single day. Their love was the foundation of our family, and their story will live on in all of us. As she finished, Emma looked out over the lake, the water shimmering in the sunlight. It felt as though her parents were still there, watching over them, their love as present as ever. A lasting legacy. Years later, the lake house remained a cherished gathering place for the family. Emma's children grew up hearing the story of their grandparents' love, a story of resilience, forgiveness, and the kind of bond that could weather any storm. On quiet evenings, Emma would sit on the porch swing, her children curled up beside her, and tell them about Daniel and Sophia. She would recount the challenges they had faced, the secrets that had tested them, and the unshakable love that had carried them through it all. And when Emma looked out at the lake, she often felt a profound sense of peace, as though her parents were still there, their spirits entwined with the beauty of the place they had called home. The oak tree by the water, where Daniel and Sophia had exchanged their vows, grew strong and tall over the years, its branches reaching toward the sky. Beneath its shade, a small plaque was placed, inscribed with words that captured the essence of their love. For Daniel and Sophia, a love that grew stronger with every storm, and a legacy that will endure forever. And so, their story lived on, not just in the memories of those who loved them, but in the hearts of generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of love. The oak tree's watchful presence. The oak tree became a sacred gathering spot for the family. Generations of laughter, tears, and celebrations unfolded beneath its branches. It stood as a silent witness to birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet summer afternoons filled with storytelling. Emma's children, and eventually their children, grew up playing by the lake, chasing dragonflies and climbing the sturdy branches of the tree. They all knew the story of their great-grandparents, Daniel and Sophia, a story passed down like an heirloom, cherished and revered. Emma often brought her grandchildren to the lake house, teaching them the values her parents had instilled in her. On warm evenings, they would sit around the fire pit by the shore, the golden flames reflecting in their young, curious eyes. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," they would beg, their voices filled with excitement. Emma would smile, her heart swelling with pride and nostalgia. "All right," she'd say, leaning forward. It all started with a wedding that didn't go as planned. New beginnings and timeless lessons as Emma grew older. She took on the role her parents once held, becoming the anchor for the family. Her children and grandchildren looked to her for guidance, knowing that she carried the wisdom of a life lived with love and purpose. One day, as she sat on the porch swing with her eldest granddaughter, Lily, the young girl turned to her with a serious expression. "Grandma," Lily began, "how did they do it? Great-grandma and great-grandpa? How did they stay so strong through everything?" Emma looked out at the lake, the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. She thought for a moment before answering. "They weren't strong because they were perfect, Lily," she said gently. "They were strong because they were honest. They didn't hide from the hard parts. They faced them together, even when it hurt. And most importantly, they never stopped choosing each other." Lily nodded, her young mind absorbing the wisdom. "I hope I have a love like that one day." Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "You will, sweetheart. And when you do, remember that love isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up, together." Generations intertwined. Over the years, the family continued to grow, with great-great-grandchildren eventually running through the halls of the lake house. Each new generation added their own chapters to the family's story, but Daniel and Sophia remained at the heart of it all. Their legacy was woven into every tradition, every shared meal, and every moment spent beneath the oak tree. And while the family expanded and life took them to far corners of the world, they always returned to the lake house, a place that reminded them of where it all began. The spirit of the lake house, decades later, on a quiet morning, Emma, now in her late 80s, sat alone by the lake. Her family had thrown a large reunion the previous weekend, and the house was once again filled with love and laughter. But now, it was peaceful. The only sounds, the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of a loon. She gazed at the oak tree, its branches sprawling wide, offering shade and comfort as it always had. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Thank you," she whispered, as though speaking to the spirits of her parents. "For everything." As the sun rose higher in the sky, Emma closed her eyes, feeling the warmth on her face. In her heart, she knew that her parents' love had not only shaped her life, but had also become a guiding light for everyone who came after them. The oak tree stood tall and unwavering, its roots deep and its branches reaching toward the heavens, just like the love that had planted it. And long after Emma joined her parents in eternal rest, the tree would remain, its presence a reminder of the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and resilience. For Daniel and Sophia, a love that began with a challenge grew through every storm and became a foundation for generations. Their story is our story. Forever. The last gift years passed, and Emma, now with a full head of silver hair and a heart content with the fullness of a life well lived, knew it was time to pass on the legacy of the lake house. It was never meant to be hers alone, but rather a place for the family, a symbol of the strength and love that had endured for so many years. She called her children and grandchildren together one final time at the house that had been the backdrop to so many moments: the wedding, the heartache, the healing, and the joyous celebrations. They gathered under the oak tree, its branches heavy with the memories of the past. Emma stood at the center, her family surrounding her, all those she held dear. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "I'm passing this house on to all of you," she said, her voice thick with nostalgia. "This house isn't just wood and stone. It's our story, our love, our resilience. It's where we learned that even in the darkest times, love finds a way. I want you to remember what we've all built here, not just the house, but the foundation of family, the ties that bind us, and the love that holds us together." Her children nodded, their faces filled with gratitude. Her grandchildren, now older, smiled warmly, their hearts brimming with pride. They understood in ways words could not fully capture what this place meant. It was their heritage, something to cherish and protect. Emma smiled softly. Keep it alive. Come back here for every birthday, every holiday, and even just for the quiet moments. And most of all, remember, love is always the answer. Love is the legacy. A new beginning. After Emma passed, surrounded by her family, the lake house became a gathering place for the generations that followed. It wasn't just the house that was cherished, but the lessons Emma had passed down from her parents, Daniel and Sophia, who had been the foundation of it all. One summer afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Emma's granddaughter, Lily, now a young woman, sat on the porch swing where her great-grandmother had spent so many evenings. Beside her, her husband and their young children played by the water, their laughter filling the air. Lily gazed out at the lake, a peaceful smile on her face. She could almost feel her great-grandparents' presence beside her. She had never met them in person, but the stories Emma had told her had always made them feel real. They had become part of her. She had grown up with their love story, watching as it was woven into her family's fabric, and now she felt an even deeper connection to them. The oak tree stood tall beside her, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. Lily reached for the small box beside her, a gift she had intended for this very moment. It was a photograph of Daniel and Sophia, taken the day they had renewed their vows at the lake house. She placed the photo by the roots of the oak tree, a symbolic gesture of gratitude. "I promise, Great-Grandma," she whispered, her voice soft but full of promise. "Your legacy will live on, as long as we gather here, as long as we remember the love that brought us all together." The oak tree's final gift years turned into decades, and as Lily grew older and had children of her own, the lake house continued to be the centerpiece of family life. It was more than a place to stay. It was the heartbeat of their family, rich with memories, filled with the whispers of those who had come before. The oak tree remained, standing watch over every gathering, its branches as wide and welcoming as the arms of the family it had sheltered for generations. Then, one quiet spring evening, as Lily walked to the oak tree, now with silver streaks in her hair, she noticed something that made her pause. Among the many flowers and vines that had grown around the tree, she saw a small sprout growing from the base of the trunk. It was a tiny, fragile seedling, but it was undeniably alive. Lily knelt down, her fingers brushing the delicate leaves. A sense of awe filled her, and in that moment she felt a deep connection to her great-grandparents, to Emma, and to everyone who had passed through this place. The family's love had taken root, just like the oak tree had, and now another chapter was beginning. "This will be their legacy," she whispered to herself, smiling as she stood up. "This is their last gift, to remind us that love, like life, always finds a way to grow." And so the cycle continued. The lake house, the oak tree, and the legacy of Daniel and Sophia endured, woven into the fabric of each new generation. A love story that had begun with a single moment of heartache and revelation had blossomed into a family that would never forget the importance of choosing love, of standing together, and of continuing the story that was theirs to tell. And when the day finally came for Lily to pass the house to the next generation, she knew, as Emma had known before her, a new legacy blossoms. As the seasons continued to change, the lake house stood firm, its walls now filled with even more history, more laughter, more tears. The oak tree, once small and young, now towered over the family, its roots deeply entwined with the land, much like the love that had taken root across generations. It had become a symbol of the family's strength and enduring connection, a living testament to the story of Daniel and Sophia, Emma, and all who had come after them. By the time Lily's own children reached adulthood, they had become stewards of the house, learning its history and understanding the importance of maintaining the traditions that had been passed down. It wasn't just a home, it was a heritage, a sacred space where love had been nurtured and where they could come together to recharge, renew, and remember. One summer afternoon, as Lily walked through the familiar halls, she came across an old, faded photo album. She flipped through the pages, each picture a snapshot of moments that had long passed. Daniel and Sophia standing in front of the oak tree on their wedding day, Emma as a young mother, and family gatherings filled with joy and laughter. Every picture, every moment, seemed to carry an energy all its own. It was as if the house and the lake held the echoes of those who had once walked through its doors. Her thoughts were interrupted when her granddaughter, Ella, appeared at the doorway. Ella, a bright-eyed young woman with a heart full of curiosity, stepped inside, holding something in her hands. "Grandma," she said, her voice filled with excitement, "I've been thinking. What if we could plant another tree, right next to the oak tree? One to honor every new generation." Lily's heart swelled as she looked at the young woman standing before her. Ella had inherited not just her love for the lake house, but also the same unwavering belief in family that had always anchored their lineage. "That's a beautiful idea," Lily said softly, her hand resting on the album she'd been holding. "A new tree for each generation, just like the oak that stands so tall and strong. It would symbolize how love grows, how it evolves, and how we carry our history with us into the future." The roots of the future years passed, and the idea of planting a new tree each generation became a cherished tradition. The oak tree remained at the heart of the family's gatherings, but now, beside it, young saplings, each one a gift for a new chapter in the family's journey, began to take root. Ella, now a mother of her own, stood with her young children beside the oak tree one autumn afternoon. They were planting the latest sapling, a small tree to honor the birth of her second child, and as the little one's roots were nestled into the earth, Ella felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It was a feeling she couldn't fully describe, but she knew in her heart that her family's legacy was now intertwined with the legacy of the oak, the house, and the lake. It was as though each new tree was a promise to honor the past while looking forward to the future. And so, the cycle continued. The house was passed down, one generation to the next, each one adding their own stories, their own laughter, their own challenges to the tapestry. The trees grew, the lake sparkled in the same way it always had, and the love that had begun with Daniel and Sophia and carried on through Emma remained the cornerstone of it all. A reflection of love one evening, many years later, as the family gathered for another reunion beneath the sprawling branches of the oak tree. Lily, now an elder herself, sat in her favorite rocking chair, observing the lively scene before her. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren were playing by the water, their laughter echoing across the lake, while her children and nieces shared stories around the fire. The house, the lake, and the oak tree had become the touchstones of their lives, a place where they always returned to reconnect, to remember, and to celebrate their shared history. Lily smiled softly, her gaze shifting to the lake house in the distance. She could see her children and grandchildren carrying on the traditions that had been so lovingly passed down to them, and somewhere, in the gentle rustling of the oak's leaves, she felt the presence of Daniel and Sophia, Emma, and all those who had come before. Their love had transcended time, their legacy woven into every laugh, every story, and every new beginning. As she sat there, content in the peace of the moment, Lily whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the house, the lake, the trees, and most of all, for the love that had not only withstood the tests of time, but had flourished because of them. "Thank you," she said softly, for showing us that love never ends. It only grows. And, with that, the legacy of Daniel and Sophia, of Emma and Lily, and of generations yet to come, continued to flourish in the hearts of all who called the lake house their home. The generations to come. The years continued to weave their quiet tapestry, each thread a new experience, a new generation added to the family story. The lake house, now weathered by time, still stood proudly as the centerpiece of the family's legacy. The oak tree, with its now towering branches, had witnessed countless moments of joy, pain, growth, and love. Its presence had become more than just symbolic. It had become the heart of the family, a living reminder of the strength that came from the ties that bound them all together. Lily, now in her twilight years, sat on the porch one evening, the cool breeze rustling through the leaves. Her children and grandchildren were gathered at the lake, their voices full of laughter and excitement. She could hear them, even from a distance. The same sound that had filled the house so many times before, echoing through the walls, across the land, and into the very fabric of their history. Her gaze lingered on the oak tree, its branches now, so full and strong that they seemed to touch the very sky. The roots of the tree had spread deep into the earth, entwining with the land beneath, much like the love that had intertwined their lives. Lily smiled to herself. There had been so many challenges, so many moments when they had been tested, but love had always been their anchor, their foundation. A final promise. One day, as the family gathered for another reunion at the lake house, Lily knew her time was drawing near. She had lived a long and fulfilling life, surrounded by those she loved, in the house that had borne witness to every step of their journey. Her children and grandchildren had grown into the kind of people she had always hoped they would be: strong, compassionate, and deeply connected to their roots. Sitting in her rocking chair by the lake, Lily looked around at the faces of her family. They were all there, her children, her grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren running along the shore, their laughter blending with the sound of the waves. It was a scene she had dreamed of many times, one where the love of the past continued to shape the future. "Gather round," Lily called softly, her voice carrying the weight of the years and the wisdom she had gained. Her family gathered around her, some sitting on the grass, others standing close, all of them with attentive, loving eyes. "I want you to remember," Lily began, her voice gentle but firm, "that the oak tree is not just a tree. It's a symbol of all that we've built together. It's the embodiment of our love, our resilience, and our commitment to one another. It represents our history and our future. As long as we stand together, as long as we remember what came before us, our roots will grow even deeper." She paused, letting her words sink in, her eyes meeting each of her children and grandchildren in turn. "This house, this land, this legacy, it's yours now. You are the stewards of our story, and I know that you will continue to care for it just as we have. You'll add to it, you'll grow it, and you'll make it your own." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke, but there was no sorrow in her heart, only love. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I know that when my time comes, this family will continue to thrive. The love we share will never fade." With that, Lily closed her eyes for a moment, as though making a silent promise to the generations that would come after her. The legacy continues. Lily passed peacefully in her sleep that night, surrounded by the love of her family. Her passing was bittersweet, but the family knew her legacy was far from over. The house continued to stand as a beacon of their shared history, and the oak tree grew even taller, its roots entwining with the very fabric of their future. In the Years that followed, the family would gather year after year at the lake house, beneath the sheltering branches of the oak tree. New trees were planted to honor the births of children, the milestones of their lives, and the seasons of love that would continue to grow. Ella, now an elder herself, took on the mantle Lily had once held, guiding her children and grandchildren, with the same love and wisdom that had been passed down through the generations. The traditions remained intact, and the bond of family grew stronger with each passing year. The lake house, the oak tree, and the stories of Daniel and Sophia, Emma, Lily, and all who had come before would continue to be shared and cherished by every new generation. They were more than just names or memories. They were the roots that held the family together, the foundation upon which their lives were built. And so, as the sun set over the shimmering lake one final time, casting a warm, golden light across, the land, the love that had begun all those years ago, lived on. It bloomed in the hearts of every family member, in every new sapling planted, and in every whisper of the wind that rustled through the leaves of the oak tree. The everlasting circle, A's. The seasons continued to turn. The legacy of the lake house and its oak tree became even more firmly entrenched in the lives of each new generation. The house, with its creaking floors and sun-warmed walls, seemed to hold its breath as if waiting for the next moment to unfold. It stood as a steadfast reminder that no matter what challenges the family faced, they would always have each other, and the love that bound them together. In the years after Lily's passing, the family grew even more intertwined with the history of the land. As Ella stepped into the role of matriarch, she found herself often standing beneath the oak tree, just as her mother and grandmother had done before her. She would close her eyes and feel the whispers of the past, the love that had been passed down to her. The oak tree had become more than just a physical presence. It was a connection to everything that had come before and everything that would follow. One autumn, as Ella's youngest daughter, Mia, celebrated her 18th birthday beneath the oaks, now vast branches, a quiet understanding filled the air. Mia, bright-eyed and full of wonder, had always felt the pull of the lake house in her heart. It wasn't just the beauty of the place, but the deep sense of belonging it gave her. The legacy of the house, the lake, the oak tree. It was her inheritance. She understood even at such a young age that this was where her family's story began, and it was her responsibility to help continue it. She stood beside Ella, the two of them looking at the horizon where the sun dipped low over the shimmering waters of the lake. "Do you think I'll ever be as wise as Grandma Lily?" Mia asked, her voice soft with reverence. Ella smiled, a wistful look in her eyes as she thought of her mother and grandmother. "I think you already have her wisdom, Mia. It's in your heart. It's in the way you see this place, the way you feel the love that surrounds you. Just like the oak tree, your roots are deep in this land, and that's something no one can take from you." As Mia planted a new sapling beside the old oak tree in honor of her coming of age, she whispered a promise to carry the torch forward, to protect and nurture the love that had shaped every branch, every leaf, and every memory. She knew that this tree, like her family, would always grow and evolve, but it would never forget its origins. The strength of love years turned into decades, and the family continued to gather at the lake house. Now, Mia, with her own children, would bring them to the lake, where the trees they had planted, each one symbolizing a new chapter in the family's journey, stood as sentinels of the love and memories that had been cultivated over generations. The oak tree had grown so tall now that its branches seemed to brush the very sky. The house, though weathered by time, stood firm, each creak and crack a testament to its resilience. The love that had once been a small spark between Daniel and Sophia had grown into an unbreakable flame, passed from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. Mia's son, a young boy named Noah, stood beside the oak tree, gazing up at its towering branches. He reached out, gently touching the rough bark, feeling the texture of something so ancient and strong. It was then that he understood. This wasn't just a tree. It was a living connection to everyone who had come before him. "Mom, is this where Grandma Lily's spirit lives?" Noah asked, his voice filled with a child's innocence and wonder. Mia smiled, her heart swelling with the beauty of the moment. "Yes, Noah. She's here, in the tree, in the house, and in all of us. The love we share is what keeps her spirit alive. She's always with us, just like the oak is always here, growing, reaching, and giving us strength." Noah smiled up at the oak tree, feeling as if he could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before him. And in that moment, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the lake in a soft glow, he felt the weight of the family's love, the roots that ran so deep into the earth that would forever tie them all together, across time and generations. Endless circle of love as the years continued to unfold. The story of Daniel and Sophia, Emma, Lily, Ella, and now Mia and her children became more than just a family's history. It became a living, breathing narrative, passed down with love and reverence. The oak tree, standing proudly beside the house, continued to grow, its branches stretching wide, embracing the generations that would come. Each new sapling that was planted beside it was not just a tree, it was a symbol of the family's enduring strength, the continuation of a legacy that would never fade. And when Mia, now in her twilight years, stood beside the oak tree one last time, her grandchildren gathered around her. The endless horizon, as time pressed on, the lake house stood as a beacon of continuity, a place that had withstood the storms of life, both literal and figurative. The house itself, once a fresh and youthful structure, had aged into something timeless. It was no longer just a home, but a living archive of stories, photographs, and cherished memories. The walls, with their gentle creaks and sighs, whispered the tales of the generations that had called this place home. Ella, now an elder, in her own right, would often sit by the lake's edge, gazing out over the water as it shimmered with the colors of the sky. Her children and even her grandchildren would join her, but she always found a quiet peace by the water, where the past and present seemed to blur. One afternoon, Ella found herself once more sitting beneath the mighty oak, the great tree now, towering over the family, its roots deep within the earth. She looked up at its gnarled branches, a living testament to the journey of the family. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and for a moment, Ella closed her eyes, feeling the presence of all those who had come before her, the echoes of Daniel and Sophia, of Emma, Lily, and Mia. They were all there. A new generation had risen, and with it, fresh promises, fresh love. Her granddaughter, Clara, stood nearby, her feet bare in the soft grass as she walked toward the tree. Clara had always been close to the house, drawn to the legacy it carried, its history, its stories. She was a storyteller by nature, a woman of the future who cherished the past. Clara looked over at Ella and asked, her voice soft with reverence, "Grandma, do you ever wonder what will happen when we're gone, when we're no longer here?" Ella smiled gently, her heart full of love and wisdom. "I think of it often, Clara, but I've come to realize that what truly matters is not what happens when we're gone, but what we leave behind while we're here. Every tree we plant, every story we tell, every bit of love we share, it's what keeps our legacy alive. It's what ensures that no matter where we are, we're always part of this place." Clara nodded, her heart filled with understanding. As the wind picked up, the branches of the oak tree swayed, and a single leaf, golden in the fading sunlight, drifted down to the ground. Clara bent down to pick it up, holding it in her palm as though it were a treasure. "I'll take this," Clara said quietly, "and keep it with me. It's a part of them. It's a part of us." The circle continues as the years continued to pass. The legacy of the lake house remained strong, unwavering. The family had grown, its branches stretching wide and touching more lives than any one person could have imagined. Each generation added to the tapestry, creating their own stories while carrying forward the lessons of those who had come before. Clara, now a mother of her own, brought her children to the lake house, just as her grandmother and mother had done. She would sit with them by the oak tree, telling them the stories of the past, of Daniel and Sophia, of Emma, Lily, Mia, and all the others who had lived and loved there. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon and the soft glow of twilight bathed the lake in its serene light, Clara gathered her children beneath the oak. She held her daughter, Lily's namesake, close to her heart, and smiled as the sound of laughter filled the air, just as it always had. "Do you think," her son, Benjamin, asked as he sat beside her, "that we'll always come back here?" Clara nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. "As long as we keep this place alive in our hearts, we will. This house, this land, this oak, this is who we are. It's in our blood. It's in our souls. It'll always be a part of us, no matter where we go." And with that, the family continued to gather, season after season, beneath the oak tree, passing down their love and stories to the next generation. The lake house remained not just a home, but a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of family. The final gift years later, as Clara stood beneath the oak tree, now heavy with the weight of history and love, she felt the presence of those who had gone before her. It was as if they were all still there, watching over her, guiding her, just as they had always done. Clara's children had grown, and she too had come to the realization that the legacy she carried was not hers to keep but to pass on. Her grandchildren, eager with the same energy she had felt in her youth, would soon take their place in this circle of love. On one final summer evening, as the air shimmered with the warmth of the setting sun, Clara held her youngest grandchild, a boy named Theo, in her arms. She stood before the oak tree, watching as the light filtered through its leaves, casting soft shadows on the ground. "This tree," Clara whispered, "is where it all began, and it will continue to grow long after we're gone."